recording now. So that also means that I have, I'm going to be multitasking. I'm going to be admitting people as they tune back in. So now that we have a little more time, if you can bear with me a moment, I am going to actually read people's introductions tonight, because usually that was a time suck away from the allotted hour and a half that we have for readers usually. So Joshua, would you like to go first after I introduce you?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay.
Would you like me to go ahead and, I mean, I was planning on about 10 minutes, but I think this might be more like 17 to 20. You want me to just go ahead and read the whole story? I was going to read part of it.
In general, I think, I think in general, I think it's like after about like 12 or 15 minutes of reading, a reader, no matter how awesome they rule, they tend to sort of overtax the audience's attention span. But tonight is a special circumstance because my electricity effed up. So I would say, why don't we just give everything free reign tonight? You're tuning in for a reason, because you want to hear really cool writers. And I would say read as much as you think it's going to be like 17, maybe 20.
Maybe it might be a little shorter. It's not a very, very long story.
Yeah, you can read super fast, like Tron or something. I don't know. But I'll try to read your biography even quicker. How's that? Without sounding too super annoying. All right, here we go. And like I said, please bear with me as I try to admit people who got my email about like losing power and stuff. But yeah, tonight we are down one reader, but we have two wonderful and very storied readers with us tonight. So the Lovecraft Arts and Sciences bookstore is back up and running, of course, as most of you may have known. But the best place to see what's going on with the bookstore and Necronomicon, which is the sort of every 2 years convention. Now it has a leap year, is just to go to weirdprovidence.com. So Joshua Rex is American author of speculative fiction and MA in history candidate at Bowling Green State University. He was born in Sandusky, Ohio, yes, and grew up in between the Midwest and New England. He's author of the novel A Mighty Ward, Rotary Press, and the collections The Descent and Other Strange Stories, Weird House Press, and What's Coming for You on Rotary Press. His short fiction has appeared in Night Script, Pseudopod, Tales to Terrify, and others. He is the host of the Night Parlor podcast, where he interviews authors, artists, historians, musicians. He lives, parentheses, for now, and parentheses, in Ohio. So Josh, would you like to read us what you got? And we are recording now. So thank you everyone for putting up with me, and sorry about the technical glitch. So we are now underway.
Hello, everybody. Larissa, thanks so much for that introduction. The story I want to read for you, or part of the story, we'll see where it goes, is from, well, this story was first published in Night Script 7. It's in my collection from Weird House, The Descent and Other Strange Stories. And it's called The Passing. You are here to watch me die, the old woman said. She did not look near death, at least not to Klaus, nor did he understand why, of all the children gathered downstairs in the parlor, he alone had been summoned to his grandmother's room in the attic of the 5-floor Zoberstab Fachwerkhaus, which she occupied like its brain, or in keeping with her nickname, Eine Vespa. Whether or not she actually resembled a wasp, Klaus didn't know, for none of the children had ever seen her. Klaus had been playing Elfern with his cousin Ingrid and was turning over the King of Leaves card when his mother appeared in the doorway between the dining room, where all the Zoberstab elders had gathered, and the parlor. She held a lantern in her tapered waist. She held a lantern at her tapered waist, and around her wrist hung a large iron ring loaded with barrel keys. She was pale as the face on the cameo at her throat. The grandfather clock along the west wall, steady as a strong heart, ticked several long moments before she spoke. Klaus, deine Großmutter Zauberstab would like to see you. His cousins looked up, each regarding him with identical expressions of trepidation. She wants to see me, mother. That is what I said, his mother replied sharply. Come, Girard. The staircase was of dark wood and creaked like the hull of a galley on a roiling sea. Klaus had never been beyond the first level of the family house. In the upper floors, the shadows seemed to gather like smoke, obscuring the archaic furniture and window coverings. The rooms were tomb-size, filled with breath-smothering dust. The objects Klaus was able to glimpse in the steadily decreasing light seemed incongruously old, as if by mounting the stairs, he was walking back along an ink-drawn timeline on a leaf of ancient vellum. On the landing of the third floor, his mother drew a match from her chatelaine, struck it, and lit the lantern, the flame swelling warmly on the wick. Klaus gasped as the corridor filled with faces. His ancestors' paint-crackled visages stared at him imploringly, some so vividly rendered they seemed to be peering through midnight windows, their hands or elbows resting on the edges of the frames as if they were sills. He thought that they might actually know some of their names. He was always asking his mother about his Vorfahren, particularly those on her side. His father knew little and cared little of his own Baden heritage. The portraits were so lifelike, it was eerie to think that only a moment ago they had been looking into darkness. His mother was mounting the next set of stairs, the cadence of her steps even and unequivocal as the grandfather clock. As she moved, the light went with her, again shrouding the faces. Klaus scurried up after her, glimpsing more family members on the subsequent levels. His mother moved quickly, and so he was allowed only an ephemeral peek, but he noted that the likeness became smaller and smaller and less ably wrought, austere with crude lines and sparse coloring. They were also very, very old, rendered on wood panels and plaster rather than canvas. As the lantern light trailed along them, it glinted off facets of bright, saturated color and gilded contours, jewels, gems, even a few crowns. The fifth level was a single long passage. The floor was carpeted or coated with what felt like moss. Klaus's footsteps became muted and his mother's trailing skirts hissed as they dragged along it. Ahead on the far left was a low arched door, rich gold brown in color, streaked with what looked like resin and deeply scored. As his mother approached it, she lifted the key ring, and after several moments of nervous fumbling and sorting, she isolated one and slid it in the antiquated lock. The mechanism turned with a grinding click and the door opened, slowly and ponderously, revealing the first 3 steps of a narrow, winding stair. A smell like moldering leaves wafted down from the space above, accompanied by a hoarse yet stalwartly voice. Komm her, Junge. The words and the way they were spoken reminded Klaus of a witch from one of the Markens his mother would read to him. He looked at her now, his expression one of panic in the dim lantern light. She knelt, brushed his tow-colored hair back with one quavering hand, and held his face. Her eyes were moist as they brazenly scanned him, as if trying to memorize every detail. She reached in her pocket and drew out a small black book and a necklace of dark beads. Klaus recognized these, though he did not understand why they were being given to him now. She placed the necklace over his head and put the book in his hand. Then she pulled him to her and held him in her desperate embrace, pressing her lips to his forehead before turning him toward the door. Oma Vespa is waiting, she said. Her words were strangely flat, belying the prior ardent display of physical affection. You will wait for me, yes? Klaus said, his eyes moving to the lantern. The thought of walking back alone in the black through which they just passed seemed incomprehensible. Go on, his mother said sternly. Klaus glanced back several times as he started up, making certain that she had not left, that the light had not left. His mother appeared calm, though her expression seemed deceptively impassive. As he approached the top step, he heard the door close and lock behind him. He had a vision of her in that moment, retreating hurriedly through the hour-woven shadows, lanterns swaying, the twisted wooden furniture and the countenances rendered in tempera and oil flashing like things illuminated by lightning as he fled. Come, come, your mother has not left you, the voice above beckoned. It seemed to draw Klaus toward it, up the remaining stairs. The stink of rotting leaves grew more pungent, combining with the sweet scent of the aged rafters into a sort of cloying musk. Klaus became aware of his thundering heart, beating triple time in relation to the cadence of his shoes scraping dryly on the steps. His fear was extreme, but he found that he could not account for it, for inscrutable as Oma Vespa was, as frighteningly as his relatives depicted her in their presumably apocryphal tales concerning the old woman's startlingly intuition, the way she seemed to know everything about them, she was still his grandmother, his great-great-great-grandmother, astoundingly. And she had, after all, favored him over the others with her gifts, like the black book the size of a deck of playing cards with EDDA embossed on the leather cover, the language so arcane and the fractal font so ornate, Klaus couldn't tell if it was a collection of verse or stories or spells, and the equally enigmatic necklace of ash tree beads arranged a rosary-like on a silver strand that ended in a small wooden horse. The passage of these precious family artifacts to a 9-year-old boy had caused a fractious and acrimonious schism among the elder Zoberstabs. Klaus had heard his mother relaying to his father Oma Vespa's words as she entrusted the objects to her great-great-granddaughter to be given to Klaus. You must be cautious with him, Johanna. The boy is a root, and the others like the gnawing dragon. He is the only living Zoberstab able to bear the green crown. He is vital to you all. Klaus had held the items only once, in his bedroom with his parents standing side by side before him, regarding him with uncharacteristic apprehension. After a few moments of bewildered examination, Klaus had handed them back to his mother, who, reaffirming as if reading from a decree that they were and always would be his, placed the items in a bureau drawer and locked it. He had not seen them again until now. But emerging on the top step, Klaus felt all at once ridiculous at having been so afraid. What had he been expecting? Certainly someone more imposing than the plain old woman seated in a plain old chair. The room was likewise as ascetic. There was a simple bed beneath a diminutive square window under the eaves. The window was occluded by a wooden shutter, which was latched with a single bent, crooked nail through a metal hoop. The bare pitch space was lit only by 3 tallow tapers stuck on spikes of a crude wrought iron candelabrum standing on a simple wooden table to the right of the chair. Oma Vespa herself was gnarled and mummy-gaunt, with a thick white mane of wild clotted locks glazed with a dull sheen like the color of green lichen. The candlelight projected a silhouette of her hair onto the slanting ceiling above where she sat. Strangely, the shadows were inverted, casting an image of what appeared to be the bent branches of an immense winter tree. Her dress was somewhat contemporary, within the last quarter century or so, and was the flat black of full mourning. Her eyes, in contrast, were so thick with cataracts they seemed to glow like twin moons. She was staring ahead, as if considering a piece of exceptional art or music, but there was no painting to be seen here, nor a pianist performing some hauntingly emotive sonata. Blind as they appeared, the eyes shifted, locating Klaus. A smile began to open, like a widening crack across her desiccated face. I think I'll stop there. Thank you for listening, everyone.
That's awesome. I mean, Joshua, I'm actually, do you prefer Josh or Joshua? Does it matter?
Josh is fine, thanks.
I am pretty new to your work, but just your imagery and your scene setting really skeeved me out, and that's a good thing. I would like to. I mean, we're gonna have some Q&A a little bit later, but I'd like to know what your what influences is. It's a little too obvious, but like what informs your writing at this point in time.
Well, I guess I could speak to maybe that story in particular, because it's sort of interesting. I was living in El Paso for a time with my partner, who is half Mexican, half Czechoslovakian, and her uncle is really into their family ancestry and has lots and lots of records and hand-drawn timelines and things that go back really far. And there's one woman in particular in my girlfriend's family that is really fascinating. In fact, some of the family members think she might have been a witch or something. There's this rumor in the family, and she died in the 30s. But we went to the cemetery in El Paso and we found her ancestors, and they have these sort of bent metal crosses because a lot of things just break down so quickly in the arid, in the heat there. And so we found this sort of, bent over cross that was her grandmother's. And so we fixed everything up and put some nice flowers by it. And so I started to think of her as a figure and, what she meant to the family. And I decided, instead of taking the Hispanic route, though, because I don't speak Spanish, I'm not as familiar with the language, and I'm not necessarily familiar with German either, but my family on my mother's side is almost 100% German. So I decided to look at my ancestry and look at how these people sort of tie into your life, even though you don't necessarily understand how they become part of you. And looking at some historical references for this, I got into the Ida, which I talk about in this, which is an old Norse mythology about this tree called Yggdrasil. And there's this sort of odd, I don't think it's quite exactly known where this myth comes from or what it all means exactly. But there's this thing about these squirrels running up and down the trunk of the tree, communicating messages from the bough of the tree down to the roots, and there's this dragon that gnaws at it. So I thought it was a really interesting thing to tie all together, to see what this sort of like, proto-Germanic history and how it maybe ties in with my family. So, being an historian or trained as an historian, history is a big focus of what I do. I'm primarily an American Victorian specialist, and architecture is also big in my work. So like in The Descent, there are a lot of stories about Victorian people and Victorian architecture. And I guess my language is sometimes a little flowery in places, but I like to try to keep some immediacy. So I guess I'm kind of just rambling on about it now, but hope I'm answering your question to some degree of interest.
No, that's super cool. Now, I'd like to ask you a favor. At some point during during tonight's event, if you wouldn't mind sending us in the chat window some links as to where we can find your writing, like any sales links to your books. I mean, anyone can like Google, but it's like having it all in one place would be nice. So
sure, will do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we will have more Q&A, of course, in after our big two readers are finished tonight. So Laird, if you don't mind, I'm going to introduce you next. Let me just go to my window here. We are now very honored to have Laird Barron here. I think the first time I met you was at I think it was Nikon, actually. I think it may have been, but yeah, it's been a while, so it's nice to see you. So Laird Barron spent his early years in Alaska. He's the author of several books, including The Beautiful Thing That Awaits Us All, Swift to Chase, and Blood Standard. His work has also appeared in many magazines and anthologies. Barron currently resides in the Rondout Valley, writing stories about the evil that men do. So without further ado, we are going to have Laird Barron share his work with us. So please.
Thank you for the intro. Just a quick thank you for hosting the event. I'm proud to be on here, and thank you to everybody for showing up for it. That was a very lovely and compelling excerpt. Joshua read, I really enjoyed that. I've actually been reading some of your stuff and really like it. So nice to be on here sharing an evening with you. As for what I'm going to share with everybody, it's a excerpt from a short story that's coming out. Ellen Datlow has an anthology coming out in June called Screams from the Dark. And there's around 30 authors, a lot of heavyweight authors, actually. It's a really great anthology. And I haven't had a chance to read all the stories, but the names. And of course, it's a monster anthology, so that is definitely in my wheelhouse. But the excerpt I'm going to read is from a story called Bitten by Himself. I'm going to go ahead and start a few pages in because there's just no way I can read the whole story anyway. And to set you up, it's one of my antiquity stories, which is what I refer to the secondary fantasy world that I've been working on. And essentially it's a dark, kind of kaleidoscopic alternate universe version of our own reality. So there's a lot of kind of contemporary sort of shout outs to contemporary culture mixed in with medieval and even dark ages culture, but that's sort of the weird theme of it. And to set the story up, it's about a guy who lives in this huge forest. Imagine a medieval forest. His name's Charles Custer Poe, and his family's kind of a bunch of scofflaws. You know, they were kind of sort of like the bandits who hang out in the woods. And he's it. And he's not the kind of guy you want to meet on a dark evening. So with that, I will begin Bitten by Himself. One night, while roving the big forest, I was bitten by myself. High on a dose of skunk weed, I'd strapped on knife, tomahawk, and my moccasins, and set forth to poach a deer from King Dick's own private reserve. Unsanctioned hunting is a perilous endeavor, best undertaken in the dead of night to avoid the peeping eye of man catchers and wardens. Alas, traveling by the dark of the moon presents its own set of challenges. Dire entities awaken with the pearly dusk. None are pleasant to encounter. Pausing for a swallow of Auverdenny, I noticed a dim flame ahead. After a bit of creeping, I parted the bushes and beheld two figures locked in mortal struggle in a glade by the light of a fallen lantern. Well, one figure mainly squirmed while the other chuckled as he stabbed with a boar's spear. The man nailed to the ground was none other than Warden Dudley, my old nemesis. I knew him by his fine cloak and badge of office. The king's personal henchman, Warden Dudley, had seen to the hanging of countless desperate woodsmen. His name was a curse upon the lips of so-called scofflaws and scoundrels within 50 leagues. The man driving the spear, wrested from the warden, I believe, was my very own spitting image. My coonskin cap, my tattered cloak and stained breeches, my moccasins, my bulging eyes and lank beard. Sinewy, veiny, ruthless, exactly, unerringly, wholly me. The only difference? He wore a filthy scarf around his neck, neatly wrapped and knotted. The feeble light made no difference. His identity registered in my bones. The other me knelt, reached down the warden's throat, and ripped a hank of flesh. He pulled mightily, while his victim uttered glottal moans. I had no idea a tongue could stretch so far. Perhaps I chuckled in amazement. My double's head swiveled. Our gazes met, and he leaped upon me, whip crack fast, teeth ripping a chunk from my neck as we tumbled. His fingers closed like steel traps on either side of my head, and his breath, St. Hasselhoff's tits, it could have blistered paint. Black stars spun in my vision, and the white rime of chaos covered the world. Truly, I thought it was curtains, and me with so many ill deeds yet uncommitted. He released me and settled on his haunches. Blood dripped from the point of his beard. Hello, old me. I couldn't speak. It felt as if I were inhaling fire. He rocked and gnawed his thumb. The Hierophant was right. Damn him. I'm shedding. His rocking and gnawing became more agitated. He regarded me with an expression of devilry unsurpassed. I knew an instant before he uncoiled that he'd decided to finish the job. The shitbird couldn't dodge midair, so I caught him between the eyes with my desperately flung tomahawk. Other me thrashed in the leaves and went still. I crawled over to receive his muttered last words. Time's a ring. I searched both men. Warden Dudley carried a pouch, which I pocketed. Sure as horse turds roll downhill, more of King Dick's lackeys would come sniffing around. Best to make myself scarce. I left the corpses for the turkey vultures and slunk away to nurse my wound. Time passed. Illness possessed me. Foam curdled in my beard. I howled at the moon. Sickness coiled in my guts like hookworms, bloated with slimy, unwholesome eagerness. There were bad days and worse days. Fugues stole countless hours and deluged me with apocalyptic visions of colliding moons that cracked in half and crowds of men boiling in the gut acids of an eternal god that lived in one of the half-shell moons. All the men wore my blistered, screaming face. And thusly afflicted, I raved and thrashed in my bed of moss inside a hollow log. Worst of the worst days ended with me suddenly clear-headed, naked as a jay, except for my moccasins, clinging to the tippy top of a sentinel pine. Scratched in a dozen places, I gawped at the Almighty's creation spread far, far below. A throttled sloth dangled from my fist. Sloths belong to the far southern jungles of Florida and Mexico and were rarely seen in the temperate north. I took it as an unlucky sign. Well, I said to the limp sloth, it can't go on this way. I climbed down, found my britches, and tramped through the hills for the nearest outpost of civilization to seek counsel. A village barber saw me straight away. He had scant choice as I jimmied a window and let myself into his bedroom while the cold white moon egged me on. Aggrieved protestations notwithstanding, the barber leeched me and tasted my urine. Headaches, hypnagogic interludes, irritability. Yes, maybe, and more so. Aversion to water? I shrugged. It's not a trick question, he said. I don't drink it. Don't bathe in it either. May I inquire what you do drink? Hooch. The man, yet in his robe and nightcap, paged through a moldy grimoire and muttered forebodingly. You've contracted the rabies, he said at last. What bit you? Does it matter? Death has you by the short hairs, I aver. He unrolled a parchment scroll and dipped a quill in ink. I'd love to record the facts for posterity. There was no sane way to explain the inciting event. I wrung my cap and asked how long, he allowed, I might hang on. I wrung my cap and asked how long, and he allowed I might hang on for another fortnight, plus or minus. The second week would be hellish and not worth the suffering. He graciously offered to administer a hemlock tonic to ease my crossing of the threshold into King Pluto's ballroom. Also, did I mind donating my brain for the advancement of medicine? Nah, I'm good. You're not good. You're dying. Can't you smell it? Everybody's dying, Leech. I paid him a handful of grimy coin I'd taken from the warden, and I trotted over to the tavern and acquired a flask of aguardiente with the remaining coppers. Fortified against persistent woe, I returned to my flop in the hollow log and got drunker than ever. This proved to be of no real help, although it dulled the edge for a while. Time passed, swooning, blurry, indeterminate. As I tossed in febrile slumber, a behemoth slouched toward my lair. You killed my boy. Oh shit. This probably referred to the sloth I'd throttled. Small trees cracked and popped as they were shoved aside. The presence snuffled at a knothole, rancid breath as cool as corpse gas against my face. Smelled your blood. Followed the snail trail through the forest. It smells good. Its voices, circled inside my skull, warped and skipping the way a gramophone needle scratches against a wax disc. Though the interior of my hidey hole was night blacked, an image of the visitor coalesced with nightmarish clarity. A vision, one might declare. The creature was shadow-cloaked, enormous as a grizzly, 2 grizzlies, hunkered atop the log, claws lightly digging into its mossy wood. Its glaucous eyes wobbled in opposite directions. Slugs and cockroaches cohabitated within its matted fur. Slack jaws oozed clabber, and its mottled, suppurating tongue knew the names of all men. In turn, I knew it to be an avatar of the Black Sloth, yet no sloth by any sane measure. Lord of the 18 Hells, patron of hunters, thieves, gluttons, and assassins, otherwise known as Zelig the Creeper, Sneak Boots, and locally Slogan, the corruption of the Paloki term Slow Skinner. By whatever name, it was a prehistoric god whose worship transcended tribal superstition and was favored by confabs of evil men across the spectrum of society. The cult had even infiltrated Empress Innocent's own court, if such profane tavern gossip were credited. Further, I intuited that however large Slogan's avatar appeared, its true form was titanic. This realm is colder than I favor in this aspect. No bananas, no guava, meat, no meat. Meat's fine in a pinch. Fingerlings, eggs, chicks. It clacked jagged bangs and licked the knothole, tasting the stink of my sweat. You slaughtered my child. Repay me with your soft innards. And maggots squirmed free of the sloth god's tongue and pattered through the knothole, wriggling down my cheeks and into the festering hole in my neck. I choked, mute, blind, paralyzed. Or we can forge a pact. Hunt your little friends. Hunt them and send their souls to me. Obey, and I'll gorge upon you last. Although not sure precisely what he meant by hunting my little friends, how could I possibly refuse? Those dagger claws were casually scraping ever close to my flesh. Taking my gurgles for a scent, the terrible presence eventually withdrew. The maggots did their miraculous work. Time passed. Ravaging fever subsided to dim coals that nonetheless altered my nature, both physically and otherwise. I existed in a state of high-functioning malaise, hangdog and moribund, yet galvanized with interludes of preternatural vitality. Nor did the hole in my throat properly seal despite the magical maggot's diligent efforts. The raw edges puckered and assumed a rigid, leathery texture. And somewhere along the line, I acquired a handsome scarf. Couldn't have leaves and twigs and flying bugs dropping in there whenever I tilted my head back for a snort of hooch. Before the infection settled into my blood and bones, I was, to put it charitably, a murderous asshole. After the bite, I transformed into a raving murderous asshole. Contrary to the barber's gloomy prognosis, the disease didn't kill me, although it certainly kindled my longing for death. Alas, raving assholes don't follow the moral course of ending their own lives, no matter how bleak the outlook. They visit their misery upon others in the guise of vengeance and necessity. Wicked old Slogan had bid me hunt, and I hunted. The big forest spreads across a third of this continent, and only its contours have been fully mapped. Its interior is a here be dragons legend on a map. No home for the faint of heart, but a fitting home to the heartless. Every tree and every bush resemble every other tree and every other bush. A tenderfoot is liable to lose his way and die of exposure, or get eaten by a catamount or a cave bear, or worse. There's always worse. Cannibal hillmen are worse. Tribes of Fomorians and troglodytes who inhabit the caverns beneath the roots of the massive firs are also worse. Wily creatures, namely jumping jacks, spiders, and two species of malevolent flightless birds, imitate human voices as a lure. Some predators wear the skins of men like ill-fitted costumes. And then there are seemingly ordinary folks cast as perfect doubles, accurate down to the mole on your ass. Yay. These latter are truly insidious, and that each believes his or herself to represent the genuine article. Hunting my weaker halves became an obsession motivated by an atavistic revulsion to the very notion of their existence. I crossed paths with them in the woods and in the city at my bucket of blood haunts, acquaintances, fellow scofflaws mainly, unwittingly assisted my efforts. Didn't I see ye in Ball Cutter Alley this very morn? Or, hey, chick, I thought ye were renting a cot in the West End. Strange to meet you here. Folks reported seeing me chopping logs on the edge of the big wood, or selling ill-gotten conies to a river village butcher, or simply lurking in one hedgerow or another. In each case, I laughed at their poor eyesight, then immediately rushed to the named location, ready to ambush these imposters, these loathsome imitations. If the ambush went well, I might enjoy an opportunity to interrogate them with heated pliers. I wanted to know who they really were and where the hell they came from, mainly. The doubles reacted to their imminent demise the same as I would have. They fought, they begged, they swore oaths to make a nun blush, and at the end, expired sullenly. Before dying, each claimed to be in the service of darkness, tasked with tracking the false chick pose and delivering their miserly souls to the black sloth, Zelig the creeper, or Slogan, depending. And as you might surmise, these sincere assertions confused and enraged me. Matters went hard for the imposters. Oh, very hard indeed. And once I'd done my worst, I whistled a culling song retrieved from the vivid nightmare of the void. On such occasions, fetid smog billowed, dimming any nearby light source. A doorway to hell yawned at my shoulder. As a final breath escaped my victims, monstrous claws breached the shadowy portal to pluck them into oblivion. I always turned away and covered my ears to block the awful crunches and gulps. Even I, uncouth and untutored, don't chew with my mouth open. And I will leave you with that.
That's a great place to to end that. That's really intense. I love it. I love it. Wow. Like I said, I'm gonna leave a lot of it. Well, we got 2 readers tonight, so I'm gonna just set things off there. Yeah, that's really skeevy and creepy, and you got your desired effect there. Now, can you please refresh us? This is coming out in the fall in Ellen Detlow's anthology, which is called. I'm sorry, I missed the title.
No problem. It's Ellen Datlow's anthology for Tor Nightfire, and it's called Screams from the Dark. And the last I saw, it's coming out early June, like the first week of June.
Okay, so that's actually pretty soon.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, were there any particular, gosh, I mean, I hate to bring up the influences question again, but is there anything that informed this story for you?
Quite a few things. I mean, obviously, we can say that about any writer, any story. There's host of things that influence it consciously or subconsciously, but the conscious influences here, old Chick Poe is actually an alternate universe version of an equally skeevy character by the same name, Charles Custer Poe, who appeared in a story I did for Steve Berman and Sean Wallace. I think it was Prime Books actually did an anthology about the Civil War, ghost stories of the Civil War, and I wrote a story about this character in our own universe. So things have just gotten worse for his alter ego, but so there's that. But the influences are the Mad Trapper Rat River, Lester Ballad from Cormac McCarthy's Child of God would actually be the two sort of overt, not even influences, but more just what I'm kind of writing an homage to when I write this character. Just that outdoor, the opposite of Grizzly Adam. He's no friend of Gentle Ben or anybody else. But also the whole setting is this weird, it's as if essentially the setting very much is North America and Europe, Western Europe, with the fairy tales. But, it ranges from the spectrum of like the fairy tale setting all the way up to the Renaissance, and it makes no logical sense. It's like almost like a dream realm. So you'll see a lot of pop culture references or anachronistic references throughout the story, which are that's just part of the flavor of the it's not quite fourth wall or meta, but it's certainly as if the tale were being told in a fugue state by a contemporary person who had read all this stuff or experienced all this stuff in film, plays, literature, music.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get that sense. I mean, and you're in upstate New York, and anyone who's been to upstate New York, the landscape just possesses you. It's just just how otherworldly it is, at least for me. I grew up in New England, and then when I go to when I travel through upstate New York to get to Baltimore or New York City or wherever, it's just possesses you.
Yeah, I agree. It's different. I actually, because I wrote, for many years out of the Pacific Northwest, and then I moved over, I've lived in Montana for a few months. I have relatives there. And then I've been here for, over a decade. And I love writing about, and then of course, Alaska. And so I was raised in Alaska. So they're all have similarities when you get out in the woods. Everywhere you go, at least in North America, there are similarities, but each also has its own eccentricities or peculiarities. And these fantasy stories are set primarily. There's some of them are going to be set in Britain, or at least this version of Britain, but most of them are set here along the East Coast, from New England down through, down actually into the southern states. And I totally agree with you. Having been in the forest in several different places now, it's a different kind of menace here, and a different kind of sort of feeling or atmosphere that you get from the backwoods around here. But it certainly is eerie in its own way, and it certainly can be intimidating.
In the best possible way or the worst possible way. It's really great. I agree.
Depends on how you prepare.
Yeah. Exactly. I hope to see both of you. I mean, I know we've got kind of the strange pandemic situation going on, but hopefully at Necronomicon, hopefully at Nikon, it's always a good time. Always a good time. And I know it's all time permitting and finances permitting, but I'm gonna climb up and actually want to ask people to unmute themselves, and let's do some Q&A. Please don't be shy, because this is actually, even though we're down one reader, this is a really cool event. So I'm sorry about the tech glitches, but I'm glad everyone's here, and please ask away, live rather than in chat, unless you want to share something in chat. That's cool too. So.
I have a quick question for Laird, actually, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, Laird, that was brilliant. And it reminds me of this quote I read somewhere by Clive Barker, that we all squat into the cemeteries of the place of the people we used to be. And I'm wondering, this hunting down of all these former selves. I mean, I guess this is probably obvious that maybe in some ways this is metaphors for hunting down these people that you were, that you despise, that you want to eliminate. I guess that's what I was reading from this. Am I accurate in that, or is there a deeper notion of this idea of doppelgangers, and maybe not even, obviously not just one doppelganger, but this notion that they might even like carry on their own existences. So these former selves, I guess, that you may have had, maybe through reputation, can carry on maybe these negative things that you don't want to be carried on anymore. Am I anywhere close with any of the reading on this?
Yeah, it's that part's limited just because of the setting. In other words, it would be if I wanted to really go crazy with that aspect of it, I probably would have said it in a contemporary setting where someone travels and would have had an opportunity to have been something other. Because the whole start of the story is sort of about providence and about how you pretty much end up, typically people end up not too far from where they begin. Like the old rap song. A lot of where you end up begins, depends on where you start. But yes, the idea of killing yourself, yourselves, your old selves, is certainly, I was conscious of that. I thought that was an interesting thing to play with. Also, the whole, in a more literal sense, obviously that's a psychological, philosophical kind of question, but the idea of doppelgangers as an actual boogeyman, supernatural force, or inexplicable, at least, sort of phenomenon, is something that I've been messing with for a long time, because I've had so many people accuse me of being places, or that they saw me somewhere. I said something to them and there was just no physical way that could have happened. I've actually interviewed about this and written about it pretty frequently, that I've had a persistent string of either a doppelganger or a string of doppelgangers in my own personal life for several, 2 decades at least.
Yeah, and there was one other thing that it reminded me of. I can't recall which story it was of yours, but it was one of my favorite moments in one of your stories, where I believe it's a character sees his brother on the shore, and there's some interaction, but he tries to talk to the brother. When he realizes that the brother is not who he thinks it is, the brother dives in the water, sort of disappears. And there's this really scary notion of speaking to someone you think you know, and again, all of a sudden, this is not even maybe a being that you're aware of. It was a brilliant part, and like I said, one of my favorites of yours. But this had some. It was a little more in depth with the character discussions, but I thought that was such a creepy aspect of that.
Oh, thank you. Well, one thing, I've been doing this long enough, is that instead of constantly rejecting stories because I've done something similar, or just not examining it and just writing whatever I feel like writing, I actually look at it pretty close and say, all right, I've interrogated the subject in the past, or I've written about the subject in the past, but now it's time to interrogate it. And there's a limitless reservoir of things that can be done with your own preoccupations. We all, no matter how varied our interests, writers, artists in general, even if they have a broad remit, their imagination possesses a spectrum, it's still, once you take in their totality over a course of time, you're still going to say, themes of love or murder, or he keeps coming back to murder ballads, or she keeps, there's always art, sculpture always features betrayal, whatever it is, or maybe a combination of those things. So instead of rejecting those or uncritically just continuing to write about them, as I'm kind of obsessed with, I actually turn the obsession try to turn into a virtue by saying, no, I've written about doppelgangers, but let's write about them in a different, either not always that even at more length, but let's come at it from a different angle, or explore a different element of it. And I do that with a lot of my writing. So it's not there may be some unconscious things that I still have yet to face, but in general, my stories now are getting to the point where I can kind of pair multiple, like here are 4 or 5 doppelganger story, or at least that, the idea of seeing yourself or seeing someone, someone's imitations perhaps would be another word to put it. I have, a few of those stories. I have a few stories about various other subjects. I'm getting to the point where I've gone back to these obsessions and sort of fleshed them out a bit, and now I have little clumps of them that I can periodically go, oh, this belongs over there, and I go put it over there, at least in my mental filing cabinet.
Thanks for answering my question.
You bet.
I think that's a really cool place to pursue, because I mean, when we're really thinking about friendship, going all the way back to Gilgamesh and Kindu, and even Han Solo and Chewbacca, the civilized person, wild man. We've got the Jolly Corner, and got Clive Barker's Human Remains. The doppelganger is like, really makes you, in some ways, out of the gate, makes you question your sanity, but also makes you wonder if you have a better place of sanity by embracing your doppelganger. There's a lot of fertile ground, I would say there. But I think I'm just saying I appreciate that you're pursuing that track. Now, I would like to climb up again and let other people ask more questions, please.
I had a question for Josh.
Yeah.
So obviously, I've beta read a lot of your stuff. I've read just about everything you put out, and we've talked a lot about how architecture and geography impact your work. Now, you've moved a lot over the past couple of years. You were out in Texas, you've been in Ohio, you've been doing this master's, and you're looking at coming back to Providence now. How has that, I guess, that rapid movement between places in geographies and being around different kinds of architecture affected your writing in the course of the last several years?
It's interesting. That's a really good question, Curtis. I think I find that my stories, I don't know how it is for anybody else who's writing, but I find when I start a story, it'll almost always be somehow linked to some place in the past. Now, it's not like I'm necessarily just using that place, but I'll sort of have something in mind, a place from the past. And one good thing about all this moving is that you sort of build up this bank. And so I feel like I have this really rich bank now of all these places, because, when you're in a place, as a writer, I mean, really, I think your job is to be in that place as much as possible at the moment and absorb everything around you. That way, those things sort of come out. You may have forgotten them, but they'll come out, when you go back and open that door on that memory. So I find that it's really, really useful, or it's been really useful, even though all the upheaval and moving can be crazy, to my writing, because again, you never know when that setting is going to come into play with a story. It somehow threads through with an idea, and it maybe just bolsters it all the more.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. I think place has so much to do with the way we visualize, but also how we dream. Please, no one be shy. Please just ask anything of everybody. So, I'm trying to prod things along here. So,
Curtis, I'll throw something back at you, if you can hear me.
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. What's up?
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm wondering, since you were living in the same place for quite a while in Salem, do you notice that your new place that you've moved into has helped with your writing?
Oh, yeah, like immediately. And also, because I've lived in cities my whole life, pretty much. And now, I mean, I'm only 15 minutes away from Providence, but the street I'm on is like there's no street lights. There's farms and horses across the street. I have all this land now. So like immediately I started writing about, kind of the anxiety of being in a place with no sirens and no lights, the anxiety of quiet at night. And yeah, I think I try to consciously absorb those things, like you said, whenever I'm in a new place, especially because I tend to settle down and hunker into places for long periods of time. So when I'm, when I do have the opportunity to move, or even when I just go like on vacation to someplace, I try to absorb as much of it as possible so I can put that into story.
Okay.
That's super cool. Now, Curtis, are you working on anything lately?
I'm working on a lot lately.
Good.
Yeah, I have a collection coming out from Hippocampus in August. I don't know if Josh and I can talk about it, but I will, because I'll get in trouble, not Josh. But we're doing a collaborative collection for Weird House, which is going to be a heavily illustrated book, with kind of like EC comic / creepy, airy inspired artwork. And then I've got like 3 other book contracts for things that I really need to finish. But yeah, so I got a lot on my plate.
Cool. Well, make sure you get in touch with Niels for the bookstore, because that sounds like something that would really go over well at the bookstore. So yeah.
I dropped in there and dropped off some warehouse stuff, just some samples like a week or 2 ago. So.
Yeah, like, I don't make those decisions, but I'm sure it would be definitely our jam. So
Awesome, thank you.
absolutely. Now, please, I'm opening up the floor for anyone, unless unless no one's really curious. Anything particular? We're weird writers and weird fans, and everything's cool. So.
Well, Laird, what about you? You've moved around a lot too. I mean, like to very extreme different places. Between Alaska and the Pacific Northwest and New York. So I imagine that the geography aspect has had a huge factor on your writing.
Yeah, it has. It's pretty central, I think, to my writing, even when the story is not about the geography. The geography is always informing the story. And yeah, I lived in Alaska, and I was talking with Josh before we went on, just that because he was asking me if I still live in Alaska, and I realized it's probably because I've been talking the last 5 or 6 years a lot about Alaska and writing about Alaska, where I never really had in the past, not to that degree. But it's just that I finally started. It took me about 20 years of being out of Alaska to consistently start feeling that I was ready to write about it. And it was a little bit different experience having lived in the Pacific Northwest. I lived in Seattle for a few years, and then I lived in the Olympia area, kind of like I do now, out in the country. Not too far from civilization, but still quiet at night type of thing. And it took me like a few years before I felt comfortable writing about the Pac Northwest. I lived in Montana for a short period, and I've only written one story about Montana, but might be more. And then I've been here for over a decade, and I actually jumped right in writing about New York, but it still took me a few years before I felt like I still don't feel 100% comfortable. It's a huge state, and I've only seen part of it. So I have a tendency to want to be kind of actually what you guys were both talking about earlier. I think it was Joshua who said, sort of absorbing your surroundings. It doesn't really matter whether you're right about it at the time. It's not incumbent to. We're not reporting. We're gathering, and it will come up at some point. It just so happens that I was able to, within a couple of years, start transitioning a lot of my writing to the local area, and I love it because it's very much like the Pacific Northwest here in the Catskill region, but kind of like a photo negative of it. You have a more defined season, consistent defined season. Gets colder in the winter, that type of thing. But the mountains are very similar. The forests are more deciduous, but they're very similar. Yeah, you step out your backyard. If you live on the edge of a town, you could be in the woods, and so there's a lot that really makes me not so much melancholic to the Pacific Northwest, but in a nice way, it reminds me, I'm still there in some ways.
Yes, the verdant realm, and you're up in John Langan sort of country. So
Yeah, I'm about 2.5 hours north of New York City, a few minutes, about 15, 20 minutes west of Langan. Before the pandemic, I used to go over there once a week, and we'd have movie night and hang out. So yeah, we're very close to each other. And then I live like in this little farming community. There's a big ridge, famous ridge that runs along one side of this little valley we're in, and then the foothills of the Catskills are right out the window, and the Catskills themselves are about 8 to 10 miles away. So it's like it's a small valley, and it's really lovely. And at night it's pitch black, but if you jump in a car, you're not too far from ShopRite if you need to get there for something.
that's great. That's great. Need to explore that more myself. Okay, does anyone else have any questions for our people? Please come forward if you'd like to say anything or suggest anything, ask anything. Just please unmute yourself rather than chatting. Testing 1, 2, 3.
I have one more question for Laird, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
please.
I-
Yes.
I'm curious, how much nonfiction do you read, Laird? And is there any in particular that you want to share, or that have been influences on your work, or that you go to as sort of default sources for some things? I don't know if there are maybe nature books, or do you read a lot of nonfiction?
Yeah, I have a tendency to, though I don't really have any defined source. I read a lot of, I would say these days, now that I'm not trapped in the wilderness in Alaska, which is when all I ever did was read novels, but and I'm not reading for any particular award, so I have a tendency to be, the bulk of my fiction reading these days is actually manuscripts. Publishers or writers send me manuscripts, so I've been reading a lot of those. Not as much pleasure reading as I would like, but nonfiction pretty much outstrips everything. And usually it's and actually a lot of videos now, because a lot of times if it's a subject, let's say it's like creepy wilderness, missing persons, that type of thing, there's whole channels now on YouTube that are devoted to that. I also watch a lot of YouTube videos by historians who reenact whatever time period you're interested. Like one of the channels, I don't have it handy, but they recreate the life of a Roman citizen, the life of a Roman centurion, or a legionary. What was it like to be, a peasant in the Dark Ages, that kind of thing. I spent like an hour and a half learning how to make rushlights, which hopefully I'll never ever have to put it to practical use. But and I watch a lot. I've been watching a lot of wilderness do-it-yourself camping, not because by God, I'm not going to go camping, but I plan to kill some people off in horrible ways while they're camping, and I want them to be as competent as possible, so that that it's not due to their ineptness. So that's been a lot of my my reading and watching the last few years, is mostly just accumulating. It's almost trivia, but basically, like when I was writing my Coleridge novels, researching how this weapon works, or when did the mafia really die out, in New York, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you're talking about watching nonfiction, because, there's obviously like the documentary route you could talk about, but I've been watching, my girlfriend have been watching tons of unsolved mysteries, the old unsolved mysteries from particularly the first like 4 or 5 seasons. One started, I think, 87 and into the early 90s. Because I've been writing a lot about sort of reflecting on childhood. I'm in my 40s, and, I start to look back on 10, 11, 12. And, it's the 80s is starting to look old now. You know what I mean? Where there was a time where, I mean, I don't know, as time goes by, it's maybe like your childhood doesn't seem like it's that far away, but now the 70s and 80s, you look at film and it feels like it's not now. It really feels distant. And there's something interesting about watching Unsolved Mysteries in particular, because it's like, it's a true crime, it's nonfiction because they're real cases, but you also sort of have that like preserved, unmediated 1980s time. And even if it's a reenactment with people that are, maybe a year or two removed from the event. So you have this interesting feel overall. The music of the show, everything, it feels very rooted in that period of the late 80s and early 90s. So I find if I'm writing about that time period, or if I were to really reflect on my childhood in that time period, that I'll go to sources like that. And I had never really considered those to be like nonfiction sources. So it's interesting to hear you talk about watching nonfiction in that way. I think that's a really nice thing with technology that we can consider now that we've been able to, 75 years ago.
Well, if I'm really serious about something, I'll get a book on it, or an online, whether it's online or go to the library or buy it or whatever. But for my purposes, a lot of the stuff that I'm researching, I just need to know a little bit about dark matter. Like just yesterday, I watched a half an hour documentary about Snow Lab, which is about 6,500 feet beneath the surface, and it's around Ontario. And they use there's a copper mine there, and on and on, right? But it's like a half an hour show, and I don't need a book on dark matter. I needed some tidbits about, and if there's some technical question that I need answered, then I'll get a book on it. But yeah, to your point, the other thing that's really interesting about YouTube or wherever online you can get these videos is I can be writing and taking notes easily while it's, I can actually be multitasking in a way that if I were just taking notes out of a textbook would be different. I literally can be writing my story while I'm listening to this, or I can be editing or something and replay it, whatever, save it, whatever I need to do. And it's really, much as finally, getting a computer back in the late 90s helped me as a writer. But basically somebody's digging in the desert trying to dig a ditch with a spoon. Somebody brings along a jackhammer, and a pickaxe and a shovel, like, here you go. I kind of feel like research purposes, the internet in general, but specifically video, the availability of videos for experts. Because I'm talking about you go to MIT and they're talking, or IBM or whomever it is, and they have authorities lecturing about this or breaking down their process. I found that has really been helpful to my research, for stories that require that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
This is super helpful for me to hear as well, because I used to just rely on analog tapes or mixtapes, or from far-flung, I would get tapes of little tidbits from Czechoslovakia over tape trading networks, or VHS, whether it was something as odd as, like, the Bud Dwyer televised suicide or something, or like just something folklore related, something Wendigo related. But now we've got social, and we're beyond AOL, and we're beyond MySpace, we're beyond Twitter at this point, even arguably. So that's really encouraging for me to hear. Okay, so that's just me chiming in. I want to hear more from the audience if anyone else wants to chime in, but no pressure. I'm sorry that we kind of had a belated start, but does anyone else have any questions? Or Laird, do you have any questions for Josh or anything? Or
I don't have a question, just a comment. I really, like I said, I've been getting into his work recently, and I really have enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this. It's a really accomplished excerpt. And I've been reading Curtis's work too, which I'm really enjoying. So that's really, I'm glad to be able to chat with both of them tonight. I mean, I'm surrounded by a lot of really talented people, and not just writers, but I'm lucky enough now to have acquired so many colleagues and friends that are, in related business, endeavors. So keep it
Yeah,
up.
thank you, Laird, and likewise. Yeah, it's a real honor to read with you here today. I've been looking forward to it, and I'm glad we can make it all happen.
Yeah, I'm glad that it was just a technical, and obviously people can catch this later as it's recorded. So
Oh, this will be on YouTube later.
yeah,
And we'll
YouTube,
have,
our favorite place.
yeah, we'll have Catherine inserted on later reading, not too long from now, because I know where to find her, because she lives right next door to me practically. And Curtis, I'm gonna track you down. I would like to have you read as well.
I'd love to, and thank you, Laird. I appreciate you mentioning my work there. But yeah, I would love to come read. And like I said, I live like 15 minutes from Providence now too, so not that it matters for this.
Yeah, I mean, for the foreseeable future, for this coming year, this will continue to be online. After Necronomicon, we'll continue the series after in September. And I mean, I'm curating it, but I'm just looking for people to just carry the torch. So absolutely. All right, so if there's no other questions, I think we will. I would just like to thank everyone for just bearing with me through my technical problems. And yeah, I hope to see you all soon. And pandemic distance. And I mean, I'm vaxxed and boosted and stuff myself, just because I'm been pretty vigilant. I've never seen it be this weird in my 50 years of life, but maybe that's why everything is so kooky now, because then you've got politics coming into it, and it's just been so strange. Anyway, yeah, you don't need to hear me beak off about that. But yeah, this will be on YouTube later, and I will make sure that I've got everyone in the loop, and I will send everyone their link to the uploaded video. And does anyone else want to share anything right now about anything, or are you good right now?
I'm good.
Just
Yeah.
thank you for having me, and Laird, thank you again. It's great to be here and read.
Likewise.
Absolutely. So this, like I said, this will be on YouTube later, and I'll keep everyone in the loop over email. And I just hope everyone has a great night. Laird, I love your Bogart poster.
It's actually, I have to quickly toss this in, not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's Jessica M's, my SO. It's her bogey poster. I'm merely his guardian while we're here.
So that's not the Oklahoma kid. That's just classic bogey.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, wonderful.
And she says, okay, you can have him in your office. That's fine.
That's lovely. Hey, keeping guard. It's everyone.
Well, the first few times when we first moved in, we moved. It's 7 years today is the day. Actually, I didn't even really think about that. So we moved here 7 years ago. It's kind of a country home, and I put him up there. And the first couple of weeks, I was really regretting it, because I just about had a heart attack when I would turn around. He was, "God, what do you want?" But I was like, "Oh, it's you." He goes, "I'm just looking out for you, buddy."
Yeah.
Get to typing.
Exactly. It's a benevolent force. All right, y'all. I hope to see you both soon.
All right.
And have a great night, everyone. Again, my apologies for the technical glitch, but I'm glad we all came together again.
Yes.
So like I said, we're gonna continue the series through August. Excuse me, through end of June, actually. I'm sorry. Just keep an eye out for the Lovecraft Arts and Sciences Facebook, and weirdprovidence.com, and the bookstore. And hopefully we can have these readings in person again, hopefully by sometime in 2023. I'd really like that.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. I'll see you soon. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thank
Here we go. Boop.